Recording in progress.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll start off with a roll call. McKee here, Schultz.
Here.
Bottoма.
Present.
Varenkamp.
Here.
Nichols.
Here.
Okay, if you'd like to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
John there was some sad news I think that some people are aware of in town, and John wanted to say a few words. And
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Thank you for the time today. I don't suppose that, and I wrote this down because it'll be hard to say for me. I don't suppose that any of you have ever heard about the Bottoма Bacon Off. I wouldn't expect you to know. When I moved here and we decided to raise pigs again, I didn't know where I was going to have them processed. So we decided to have a Bottoma Bacon Off. We went to all the butcher shops within 50 miles to see who made the best ham and bacon, and that's where we'd go for our own pigs. It was then that my weekly trips to Corcoran Meat Locker started. It's where I met Joe Andries. I still go there weekly, and I allocate a lot more time than I initially thought when I stopped there, because I enjoy talking to Joe and the rest of the folks that work there, and sometimes hearing about some things the council could do better. I think our town could tell a million stories about Joe. He was literally everywhere. Every event here for 40 years, he has been a part of, both as a caterer and also a lion. Sadly, devastatingly, last weekend Joe passed away way too early. He was this town, hardworking, kind, loved, and cherished. I'm not sure we realize today how much he will be missed. He was a man, a friend, a business owner, a kind soul, and a Corcoran institution. I ask for a moment of silence in his memory. Thank you.
thanks, John. That was really nice. It is very sad.
Yes.
He did a lot for the community.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with John. I've known him for 37 years, and
Good guy.
great family, and John absolutely summed it all up there. The biggest thing, and I wasn't quite as good as writing it down and stuff. The biggest thing that I admired Joe for is his volunteerism, anything, time, any conversation, anything, his membership to the Lions and such. And I've been trying to figure out a way to work becoming a Lions member into my timelines and stuff like that. I ask everybody that's a Corcoran resident and such, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends. It's a big hole in the Lions. There was a big hole that developed a few years ago with another one of their members, his life's ending and such. I want to speak on behalf of the Lions, even though I'm not one. They need and want anybody they can possibly get to continue to exist in our community. They are a huge part of our community. I've got 2 kids that have both benefited from the scholarships that the Lions gives. The Lions do so many things. The events they hold at their park are wonderful. The support they give any possible way in the community is what Corcoran's about. And Joe was that much to a lot of people. And thank you, John, for saying that. But if you have time at all, the Lions is a good place to take some of your spare time and commit to. So thanks, John, for saying that too.
And thank you all for the moment of silence. I think it was really nice. Okay, we will move on then to agenda approval. We do have a couple additions and some additional information. So would you like to go over that, Jess?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We do have a couple additional comments that were received by the public on the Corcoran Farms Industrial Park preliminary plat that are on the dais that were sent out to council. So just know that we did receive 3 additional emails, and we have them for the file. And then we do have an addition of item 10A, which is just a change order number 1 for the mass grading and stormwater pond for City Center Drive and 79th Place.
Sounds good. Anything from council? I do have one. I think I'm going to add an 11B, maybe more council report of the broadband grant, and want to share some news on that front. So other than that, do we have any other additions?
I met your new assistant. Is there any plans in announcing her addition to our staff? Could we do it tonight?
We certainly could at the council meeting if you would like to. So Kathy Hughes is our new Administrative Services Director at the city, and we're excited to have Kathy on board. She just started last week. Or, yeah, it was last week. Yeah, last week. So we're excited to have Kathy on board. She has great years of experience working for the Sheriff's Office as well as the City of Minneapolis, and she's jumped right in and made an outstanding addition to our team. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
We're happy to have you.
Glad to have you.
I don't need, just now, I don't know if we need to add it to the consent or the agenda or anything, but
Just did it right there. That was me.
somebody to sit through our work session and I'm like, who is it? And I found out.
And I'm sure you have no shortage of projects to be starting on right off the bat.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other attention you might want during the meeting?
Unsolicited.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll approve as amended.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I would just note that I did receive the minutes from Michelle, but I was not able to get them fully reviewed, so the consent agenda will have one less item. I apologize for that.
Should we at this point just pull it
We can
and
pull it.
table?
Yes.
Okay. Or commission representatives, we have Jay and Phil today online? Maybe?
Yes, it looks like Jay and Phil are both.
Perfect. For Parks and Trails and Planning. We'll go into open forum for items not on tonight's agenda.
Anyone wishing to speak on items not on the agenda, if you're joining us virtually, you can press *9, or reactions and raise your hand if you're joining us on a smart device. Otherwise, anyone in the audience can come to the podium, state your name and address for the record. At this time, we did not receive any comment cards ahead of time,
Okay,
and no one is raising their hand virtually.
fair enough. Then we will, no presentations or recognitions, we will go on to consent, which consists of items 7A through 7F. 7A, as Jess just mentioned, we're gonna need to pull and table. But other than that, anything else you'd like pulled?
Mr. Mayor, I would like to pull 7E.
7E. Okay,
Yeah, pull 7C.
7C. Anything else? Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items 7B, D, and F.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll start with 7A. I guess I'll introduce, or I'll make a motion to table 7A to the next meeting. Is that good? Okay. To the December 22nd meeting. Second. Perfect. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, 7C. I forgot who had which. Alan.
Can you just clarify for me for 7C, are we looking to add 1.5 FTEs?
Oh, I apologize. That was the 1.5 FTEs in 2022. In total, we've already done the one, so this would just be that half FTE that was budgeted.
FTE? Okay.
Yep, FTE. We had
And it
moved.
was already budgeted?
We
I
had,
believe so.
there was one position that we added in the year, but this communications position was already budgeted, and we had that as a strategic goal of ours to add a communications assistant.
Okay.
I think we did make a slight change when we moved forward with the administration department, but this position had been budgeted for.
Okay, thank you.
And Jeremy? Or, I guess, can I get a motion to approve consent agenda item 7C?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I
Oh, yeah, I said aye.
okay, gotcha. Sometimes I miss those.
That's fair.
Okay, then 7E, Jeremy.
My question is related to the 2023 budget for interest earnings. I know we've talked in budget meetings about trying to find higher rate savings accounts. I'm wondering what we might be able to do over the course of the next, I don't know, quarter to half of a year to try to get some better rates. If we've got significant deposits, it would be nice to get 100 grand in interest instead of 15. I would imagine it could be achievable if we're willing to make those changes.
Okay. Yeah, so the budget number, so I don't have 2022 actuals until year end, when I'll book all the interest and go through all the investment statements. So then that's why I just left the 2023 budget as is for now.
So would we have to do anything different in order to get a significantly higher rate? Is that already in process? Things you've already done?
No, so I'll just have to manage the investment, the money that we put into investment.
Okay.
So the budget line item isn't a set maximum or minimum, it's just a placeholder.
Okay.
So we can certainly look at, and we do get often, we have a lot of certificates of deposit as well as we do move money to make sure that we're getting the most out of, there are a couple of funds that we can do better than the traditional bank. So we do move money back and forth based on expenses to try to maximize.
Okay, that's good to hear. Then I will move to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And that, oops, I lost my page for a second. Completes consent agenda. We will go on to planning business, which is Corcoran Farms Industrial Park preliminary plat, and we will have a public comment opportunity here to start for the planning business.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Anyone wishing to speak on the rezoning preliminary plat and preliminary PUD for Corcoran Farms Business Park can come to the podium, state your name and address. Other ways, if you're joining us virtually, you can press *9 or click reactions and raise your hand. As I mentioned, we did get three items for the file that got emailed to council, comments directly from residents.
For sure, and we've had several meetings where
And
we've heard.
this is the third meeting
Yep.
that we've had, so
Okay.
we did try to include any, prior to the packet going out, any items that we did receive ahead of time.
Do you want me to turn my card in? I didn't.
Oh, that's okay.
Can you just state your name and address?
Linda Benson, 20205 Larkin Road. My husband Dwight. I have some questions. Is it okay to ask questions?
Yeah, I think you can, if you want to go through your questions, staff will try to take some notes, and then if anyone else comes up, or just afterwards, we'll try to address them as we can.
Okay. When are they going to be, if this gets approved, when are they going to be starting to build them? Do you know?
Just keep on going, and
Okay.
we'll get to them.
And who's responsible for paying for the road, for Larkin Road, for the improvements that they'll have to make? And can the trucks go in and out all night, 24 hours a day? And they mentioned at a meeting before that the developers were talking about taking some trees down. Do you know where that was? I guess it was because they want to put a walkway. They didn't know whether they're going to put it on the north side of Larkin or the south side. And if they put it on the south side, I think that's right. If they put it on the south side, are they going to take our trees down along the road? And then with the noise that's going to be coming from this, it would be really nice if we could have a noise ordinance put up there so that the trucks can't jake brake because it's so loud. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great questions. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Anyone else? Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Go for it.
Just a clarification question?
Yeah.
When you say take our trees, are you speaking about your own trees on your own property, or is it the general trees of everyone? Okay.
It's along the road line.
Yep. Got it.
Okay. Did you want to try to tackle some of those, and I
Sure.
can fill in as well? I have a couple notes.
Sure. I think one of the first questions is when would they be starting? And I think we don't allow them to start until after they have, they need a final plat. And so there's a bit more of a process before they'd even be able to start. So Kendra might be able to speak to the timeline.
It's unlikely that it'll be started before spring. If it got approved tonight, then they have to come back with a final plat and final PUD plan that addresses any conditions that would be on tonight's approval. So that's a few months out. Then they have to do some paperwork before they can file the final plat. So it's at the earliest, late spring of 2023 before they could get started. And I can just knock off a couple of other ones.
That'd be great.
The road improvements that were identified as part of the feasibility study would be paid for by the applicant. That includes the turn lanes at the site as well as the improvements on Larkin and other, at 116. Others in
Can you
there.
clarify that a little bit more, what those improvements were again?
So as presented on here, it was turn lanes at their entrance off of Larkin.
From Larkin onto the new Bluebell?
Yep.
Okay.
And then turn lane improvements at the intersection of 116 and Larkin.
But there's no change in between that area, correct?
Those two intersections, the new intersection with this development and the intersection at 116.
And then all the public streets within the development are paid for by the developer.
Question real quick. I know the conversation of, and I may have misunderstood last meeting, but someone had made the comment that the easement on Larkin would go from 60 foot to 80 foot. Kevin, I don't know if that was you or if I misunderstood. And some of the folks that live on the south side of Larkin, if we were to go 10 more feet into their property from the 30-foot center, their front yard trees would be gone. I mean, a tremendous number of trees if you took 10 more feet for an easement. That's not happening, is it?
So a couple of things there to unpack. So Larkin Road's a collector road, so on collector roads, we take 80 feet of right-of-way. So with this project, they'd be dedicating 40 feet of half right-of-way, basically the center line of Larkin Road north.
On their side
That's what
only?
they'd be dedicating. That's plenty of room that's designed for future road expansion,
Okay.
trails and all that stuff. So that's what we require for all our collector roads as we build out.
But nothing to the south side of
Well,
Larkin?
on the south side, when that neighborhood developed, there's one exception parcel, but they also had a 40-foot half right-of-way platted. So the neighborhood to the south, with the exception of one exception parcel, has 40 feet platted in the 1980s roughly. I don't have the date in front of me, but it was when that neighborhood platted. So at least across that neighborhood and this new property, there would be 80 feet, which would be our ultimate design that we'd look for in the right-of-way per our comp plan. So there'd be enough room to make these improvements without impacting that. There was a discussion about whether there should be a trail, sidewalk, whether it should be on the north side or the south side. That was one of the questions that the resident proposed. I think, I went out and looked at it. I do think some of those trees are right along the fringe of that right-of-way. So there is some trees planted in the right-of-way, but I think we could accommodate, even on the south side, some sort of pedestrian improvement, say from Blue Bonnet where it's gravel up to Buckskin, so that they could, access those residential neighborhoods and use those streets. I think we could do that without taking any trees down.
Without impacting their
So
trees in
basically,
their
we could
front
do that
yard.
within the power lines that are on the south side. Well, I drove it this morning, all the trees are basically on the south side of the power lines. I think we could accommodate something in the interim. Now, 25 years from now, when that road gets expanded at some point, if it
Okay.
does, we might have to get into those trees, because it is platted as right-of-way. Over 30 years, those trees grew up in there, we don't
There's
plan,
some-
we can make
there's
these
some
investments in
monsters
the
there.
interim without avoiding that now, on my preliminary analysis. But I just want to tell people that is platted city right-of-way, so at some point it could be utilized. I don't anticipate we needing that for this project.
And that's the clarity I was looking for. So it is 40 now,
With
But-
the exception of one exception parcel.
okay? And we would do everything we could to avoid any of that.
Yeah, we would want to, we have enough room to design that
Okay,
in an interim situation where we would minimize that, yeah.
One more follow-up question on that, Kevin. Thanks for the preparation there. If we required a shoulder bike lane, something on that south side as a pedestrian improvement, would there be city cost as part of that addition? Or would that be covered as part of the development?
I think that's probably, I might turn that back to Kendra. I think that's part of the discussion on whether that's a beauty benefit or if that's something we want to, I
Okay.
don't know if you have any input on that, Kendra.
Yeah, I think that could be part of the discussion this evening if the council wishes to improve that section between Blue Bonnet and Buckskin on the south side of Larkin. I'm not sure what that road status is, but potentially you could have the developer just pave that as part of the PUD. I think if it was a full reconstruct, that'd be a larger
It would-
problem, and I don't know.
It would be building a trail on the south side of the road. So it'd be a full construction of trail or
Okay, you
sidewalk.
couldn't just widen the
Well,
street
I would
and
still
pave
argue
it.
that's the same thing. You're still building a full section because the shoulder's built to less of a standard.
Okay.
So you're effectively building a trail, whether it's on the shoulder or whether it's offset by 4 feet. You could explore either option. I think the drainage is actually pushed back further, so I think we'd have the option of either literally expanding the shoulder or creating even 4-foot separation. I think we have some options without impacting drainage. And whether how that gets incorporated is,
Yeah, so I got down a rabbit hole. The answer is yes. I got a little sideways, but yes, you could require that as part of the PUD for the developer to do.
Okay,
thanks.
thank you.
Then on the questions, I'm trying to think where we left off. Do you have any others?
So we had talked about road improvements. There's a question about, we talked about the trees a bit, hours for trucks. And I'm not sure that we have specific.
We don't prohibit vehicles from driving on the public street. They can drive on the public street. We've had the conversation about Jake breaks before, and I know the police chief had some feedback about that. I don't know, Ryan, if you were.
I was not part of that.
I was there. Me too.
I haven't heard it.
I don't remember.
Well, we'll talk about it more, because it's come up not only here, but in other developments in the city.
It came up when Nelson
Right.
International,
Yep.
and if I remember right, Matt said we could have it, but it's very difficult to enforce. And now, like, this would be the third iteration of the Jake Breaks conversation. And at Nelson, they said, well, they don't experience a lot of Jake Breaks because they're newer semis that they work on, and usually they're less noisy, if not no noise. But I would like to have that conversation about Jake Breaks because it's another concern in a different part of town also.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I can tell you they're doing it daily going into Tavera. I can hear them from my house.
I bet.
Somebody told me that's bad driving. Like, you don't
Probably.
need a Jake brake in a residential construction area.
Yeah.
But
Probably accurate.
that doesn't, so there will probably be an issue on that tiny stretch from 116 to the entrance of a park or the.
Right. One thing we do have that's kind of adjacent to that would be construction hours.
We do.
So if something was being built, we do have those construction hours. I lost in the crowd where lady who spoke was.
Way back.
In the back? Okay. We do have hours of construction that we allow, and I don't know if it's actually in the draft resolution, anything referencing that, but maybe that's something we should have a discussion on. This item, just putting some language in there to reiterate that those are our hours and construction must abide by that.
But that doesn't cover 4 years from now.
Nope, just a construction, well, maybe depending on how long.
I think.
Well, yeah, I suppose it depends on how long it
Yeah.
takes, but
I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think what she's getting at is hours of operation.
Yes, yep,
businesses.
it was, yeah.
And we don't have any control over hours of operation.
We don't have anything in our code that limits hours of business operation. I mean, I think as part of a PUD discussion, the council could talk about that. I think the applicant has indicated that the folks he's talking to are not 24 hours. You want to weigh the, being supportive of businesses and balancing the residential, but you could, it's a PUD, you could have some limits. I don't see that happen too often, but you could.
so, but if we, let's pretend hypothetically, if we pass a preliminary plat or a final plat, and then later have an hours of operation standard, if within a certain whatever, we decide we want our hours of operations within a half a mile of a residential zone or something like that, could that be, if it's passed after the fact, can it be enforced only on the brand new areas of?
I wouldn't think so if it's an ordinance, it depends how it'd be drafted, I guess. If it's an ordinance saying that no business can operate in these hours if they're within X number of feet of residential or something like that, potentially, it could apply to everything.
What was it that we did with Nelson that?
It was
They-
the garage
The
door.
Yeah, the
doors, they
doors.
couldn't have the doors open.
And the
That's
lighting.
11.
And the lighting.
Yep.
Yeah, so,
And that was because of the CUP error, I think.
Yeah.
okay.
But that could be something,
Yeah.
as Kendra mentioned, that we could look at doing something related to the PUD.
Okay.
And we talked about Jake Freak, so those are the items that I had written down for notes.
I think that's all I had to. Did anyone else catch anything else?
No, I just had those
Okay.
5 questions.
Okay. So I think let's go into,
Is there anyone else to speak?
I don't think so. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Anyone joining us virtually, you can press *9 if you'd like to speak. Mayor and council, and no one else is raising their hand.
Sounds good, and let's go into the presentation.
Mr. Mayor, it's a very brief presentation, but this was tabled at your last meeting, and if you go to the next slide, specifically to address comments related to the architecture of the buildings and the landscaping. So the staff report was really focused on that with a link to the previous one. So if you'd like, I could just kind of put up on the screen some of those changed site plans for primarily the audience. I know you've all looked at them.
They were great.
Okay. So they've provided some revised architectural drawings with new elevations and new details to help break up the mass of the building, and several options for fencing to help screen the development from Larkin Road, where we're limited on the height of trees because of the overhead transmission line, without creating a barrier or a tunnel effect. So they've got a couple of options. Next slide. I put this in there, it doesn't look that different because the scale's so big, but you can see along Larkin, there's a jogging of the fence and the landscaping to help break that up a little bit. I think you can see a little bit on this, some of the changes in the additions of the colors and the recesses in the building, particularly along Larkin. Next slide. This image does show the changes that we talked about last time with the additional screening along the west side, but it also reflects the changes along Larkin where they've got a bump out island with conifer trees in that island along Larkin, and then the staggered landscaping rows and fence rows along Larkin. The next slide.
Can I ask you a question? Where's the berming?
The berm is, there's a small berm along Larkin in where that landscaping is. I mean, by small, I mean, I think it's 2 feet. The applicant's civil, I believe, is online, but.
The whole length of Larkin?
I think it is. Maybe is Jeff online?
Kendra, I can speak to that.
Okay. If
That'd be great.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm John Knust with Laux, 7200 Hemlock Lane, Maple Grove, Minnesota. Along Larkin Road, we bermed what we could due to the existing grades. We came up at 3-to-1 and then back down to the parking lot as quick as we could. There was areas where it did amount to not a whole lot of height change along that. But from the right-of-way to the edge of the parking lot, we did try where we could to get berming at a 3-to-1 slope.
May I ask a question? There's a significant grade change from the eastern edge of the property down to Blue Bonnet and then over to the western edge of the property. What are the elevations assumed on this property with that fall and everything compared to Larkin? Do the buildings roll? I already know the answer. They don't roll with Larkin, but
Correct.
on the
So-
eastern edge, are we looking at a considerable fall? Thus, no berm on the front end of the eastern ones and the western ones, larger berms?
So the eastern building along Larkin has the biggest berm. We were able to bring it up the most there. That building is closer to Larkin Road elevation. Then as you head west, Larkin Road rises in elevation.
Larkin falls to the west.
Goes up. You go uphill.
Am I backwards?
I think so.
So as you head west, I believe it rises. And those two buildings are at the same elevation, so the second half of this western building, the parking lot and building are actually below grade.
Okay.
So from Larkin, you won't see the parking lot, because it slopes up and then the parking lot drops down. We actually have a retaining wall in that corner, that,
I remember that. Down to Blue Bonnet, I thought it was a relatively rolling piece of property from the eastern side. It goes up and then it falls down to Blue Bonnet. And then, yes, I understand the wall on the western side, but I was trying to put my hands around the elevation of the buildings as in relation to Larkin, and for some reason, I thought the eastern side of Blue Bonnet, they would be at the building would be sunken a little bit more.
so, the proposed grades at Blue Bonnet, the building's gonna sit 3 to 4 feet higher than that.
Okay.
As you pull into the site, the eastern building will be approximately 3 to 4 feet higher than the elevation at Larkin where Blue Bonnet is going in.
Thank you.
May I ask you a question? So you mentioned on the western building
I'm just saying, if you go to the west.
where the berm, where this, in theory is a berm, it's actually, there's a retaining wall and the parking lot is lower?
Yeah,
Correct.
Okay.
Or where would that
So then as you go to the,
elevation be?
as you go to the east, you're saying you have the highest berm and you have a 3-to-1 slope on both sides?
That is correct. So from the right-of-way line, we came up at a 3-to-1 as fast as we could. On the farthest east end along Larkin of the east building, there's not, the parking lot is approximately, 4 to 5 feet
Yeah.
higher
Where are they
than
measuring the height?
road elevation.
See, so if I'm thinking about, I just want to thinking about this as a cross-section. So you have berm coming up and going down, and then parking lot, right?
Correct.
And the 3-to-1 is probably by city code that it has to be at that, is that right?
We actually require 4-to-1 except for special exceptions by the city engineer, so this would be like non-maintainable spots will go to 3-to-1, so this would be a spot if we're trying to maximize the berm we would allow, otherwise you typically use 4-to-1.
Couldn't you maximize the berm by, instead of going up and down, just keep going up and then adding retaining wall on the backside? To further increase the height of the berm? You know what I mean? So
It
instead of the
depends on-
berm coming up off the road and then dropping down, because the berm is designed to basically screen the parking lot rights, right? That's our requirement, is they must have berming, landscaping, or fencing.
It depends on the elevation you're going to, what that would look like. So I don't, in the basically you have 12 feet and you want to get the highest berm you can, you're going to go up 3-to-1, go flat, and then down 3-to-1. That's, you have to have some round, you can't just be a peak, it won't, stabilize.
I'm not asking
No,
about a
you're
peak.
saying then like just go up, so it's like,
Keep going up and then just drop it straight down with the retaining wall.
I think there's a limit on the height of a retaining wall in the city code.
well, the higher you go, the more it needs to be engineered by a structural. So there's some limitations over 4 feet, then it falls under a structural design, but I think you'd wanna think about that. That'd be a pretty unconventional approach to achieve that. And it really depends on what the backside looks like, but.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about,
theoretically,
can you
could-
maximize the height by not requiring a downslope, but requiring a retaining wall instead?
So instead of making like a plateau,
Yep.
right, you just make a triangle, and then you have
Basically.
a really tall retaining wall on the backside.
Right.
I mean,
More like a
you'd have to
trapezoid.
you'd have to look at that, how high that gets based on the soil, you need to be able to support it, so I mean,
Yeah.
you'd have to do a calculation there and run through some stuff, because, certain retaining walls depend on that earth behind it for support, so you wanna be careful as you tee up to the top of that, would it be stable? So that's where, like, you generally get that 3-to-1 with the that's where you could kind of build anything, right? So it's like, you wanna be careful, I guess, with that kind of visualization.
And is
That
that,
wall would have to be structurally supported, or it might fall over at the top.
is that berm and wall underneath the power transmission line?
The one that's proposed, no, it is not.
Okay. Because that was, the only thing I was thinking about was the limit of access if they had to be maintained. But the reason I bring it up is trying to think of ways to maximize the height of the berm
Yeah.
to shield as much of the vehicles and light infiltration outside of the facility. Okay.
Although isn't some of the planting and fencing supposed to go on top of that, which I would assume would be more difficult if it was
Right.
really
so
a triangle?
I think that's exactly right. So the berm, if you go to the next slide, the berm is 3 feet in front of the east building. That's as high as it can go in that distance. But then on top of the berm, there is landscaping and a fence, which is that same sort of elevation. And I think if you are planting on a berm, the only place you really can plant and have good success is on top of that berm, which I would say still can be a little bit questionable. But on a slope like that, I think it'd be really hard to get landscaping that would do well there. It's possible, but it's really hard to do. So I think that has some challenges, but it is an option. You could build a wall and you could still get some landscaping there. But I think the aesthetics might not be what you are looking for either with that sort of hill.
Well, if you could landscape it on the backside, you wouldn't see the retaining wall from Larkin, right?
Right.
You would just see grass and plants.
Right, and what I'm saying is you usually plant on the top of a berm, not on the side of a berm, and now this whole thing is the side of a berm.
Yeah, but trees grow on the side of a hill all the time.
There is a really nice berm on 101 as you go south toward 55. There's a housing development by the Northwoods Elementary School that's got like a 20 to 30 foot high berm that's pretty steep, and they've
Yeah.
got some nice trees and landscaping there.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not possible, I'm saying it's difficult. I mean, we have difficulty with small berms, with trees being planted correctly and being treated right. But, so that's an option that you certainly have. It's just, as Kevin said, it's complicated.
Question that's just kind of sitting in too, if this were to go, I like the idea so far, a fence, is it gonna be sections of fence broken up by landscape, or is it gonna be one long fence? Being a horse person, a farm person and stuff, I'd rather see a fence along the whole thing. The staggered look,
Yeah, can you go?
I'm not a fan of the staggered look, and I use the one along 101 across from Rush Creek Golf Course, that it just looks not right. It doesn't look like, and I'm stuck on, I spoke of like an equestrian facility. This is called Corcoran Farms. I'd like to see that front looking like farms and stuff, and it does. It looks like the fences are broken and staggered and stuff. I'm not a big fan of that, but if that helps.
So you'd rather just have it be one?
I'd just rather have it be
Farthest out.
fencing and the landscape or the trees and the shrubs and everything are put on both sides of the fence.
Gotcha, so maybe you'd
It's
find
a
middle
cleaner
point
look to
there,
me.
just go straight across.
And again, if it's gonna be called Corcoran Farms, it would be nice if the facade could look like
Yeah.
a farm.
I would agree if there were actual, like, linear gaps in the fence, but because it's a continuous stripe, it's just there are sections that have gaps. So I'm okay with that part of it. If we could make it taller, I would be open to entertaining Alan's concept if that's
Taller
feasible.
berms and stuff.
Yeah, I want to, if it's gonna go in, I want the max to detract from the look that we can, right? Cars pulling in, I'm sure that the design of the berm is to keep traffic lights out of residential homes across the street, but the higher you can make it, the better, because that car, when it's up to the berm, you're not gonna see the light, but when it's pulling in, you're gonna see the light, right? Because your angle is so much greater.
If we say yes to this, I want it the best we can possibly do for the neighbors across the street in Larkin.
For sure. So I think that'd be something we need to try to figure out, the berm issue.
I have another concern, and
Yeah.
I don't know why it sticks in my mind so much, but Blue Bonnet is a dead end to the south. Is that right?
Today it is.
It is.
Yeah, there's some, residential driveways off of it, yeah.
I know that, I just,
It stubs into Tavera.
at some
And
point,
there's a plan to connect Tavera to Blue Bonnet in the future. And when the property on Blue Bonnet, if and when the property on Blue Bonnet develops and improves that road, that connection will be made.
Trevero will be a stub street until people make the choice to do whatever on the Blue Bonnet that exists today.
You can sit if unless you have anything to come and say. Sorry about
Thank you
that.
very
Didn't
much.
notice.
Sorry to make you stand.
Well, here's what happened.
So the screening, I'll just wrap up, and then, on the fencing, they were very open, as you saw in their narrative, to whatever the council wants to see. However, they still have to get the electric company's approval because it's under that transmission line. And so we are showing a variety of fences. I think the applicant has indicated they don't care if it's staggered or not. I think that's an aesthetic preference of the council. I think they've shown you, vertical and horizontal options. Some look more residential, some look more agriculture. I think they're open to all of those things. Again, the screening is limited in height because of that transmission line. So again, you get a taller berm, you're still the max height. You're going to have to look at what landscaping can go on top of that taller berm or wall, but those are all options, and I think the applicant has provided a number of alternatives for the council to consider, and certainly open to others if you have other ideas. And then I just wanted to talk a little about the architecture. We were asking them to do some changes to the building design with, we didn't give them real specific direction, but they went back and lifted the roof on the setback portions of the building. So there's portions where the color is darker and it's set back, primarily where entrances are, and that you can see the roof line jogs up there to help break up the building. They've added taller windows at the entrance to the individual units. They've added the clear story windows and more windows along the front. They've added some line work and paints. You can sort of see up atop the clear story windows. There's sort of a blue accent color, as well as above that darker tan entry piece. They also added some clear story windows along the side that faces Blue Bonnet. So whether that's enough, whether that's what you were looking for, I think they wanted to provide feedback, but did attempt to provide some additional architectural elements with this version. And I think that might be the last, that's just the site plan and the fence, and that's the site plan again, so you can kind of see that. So again, the applicant's team's here. I'm happy to answer questions. I just wanted to, for the audience, to show some of the changes that were made. And obviously, the council has several options. You could move to recommend or to deny per the Planning Commission, or there are draft resolutions for approval, which obviously could be modified based on the things that you talk about tonight.
Thank you. Anyone want to start us on a specific topic? I think the big ones I have noted for discussion that we've briefly touched on here were the trail access off Larkin, maybe as a PUD benefit. The hours of operation conversation we touched on a little bit, if that's something we could add in PUD. Alan's discussion on the berms and berming, and then the fence options and whether it's a straight line or broken up or all that. So
I would add one more, that's probably just a clarification. The fence along the west side that the applicant started all of this with, I thought was a good feature for those folks who border on the west. I didn't notice in the resolution of control as to what the material of that fence would be. Do we know, is that a wood fence, is that a composite fence? And does that need to be something that is detailed in more clarity?
Let me check. I think it says it's a composite fence, and I thought we had a condition that said they need to provide details with the final PUD.
I just did a word search for fence in the approval resolution. I didn't see much pertaining to that one.
So can I talk about one thing?
go for it.
Just, I want to talk about Dean's comments about the fence. Because I grew up on a farm too, and when I drive by fences that are staggered like that, it drives me nuts because in my head, like, the animals are going to get out. Like, why would you do that? And so I don't know if you feel that way.
I just didn't talk crazy like you, but I'm right there with you.
But I've said a lot, I'm not a designer. It's all functional for me. And so I've talked about these staggered fences with people, and I'm like, I don't get them.
Me neither.
But people who are in that field say that staggered fences are more appealing to not farm guys, but to the regular public. They're more appealing and are additive to landscape design for normal people who don't, who, so I'm open to, and I would want to not, I'll say I'm not an expert on landscape design, and I would rather have someone who knows that stuff make those kind of decisions than me for sure, but maybe.
I understand what you're saying, but being rural and country and stuff, there's nothing better than a nice straight fence, clean corners.
Oh, yeah,
everything
yeah.
else. Just saying. And if you drive around, it drives me nuts to go through Maple Grove and see these broken fences with broken landscape. If I'm insulting a designer, I'm sorry, but that's me. I'm a country boy, so I just, the ones that have gone in and stuff, in the Maple Grove area and a couple other areas, they have not been maintained very well. The fence that I truly admire, other than what it's manufactured off of, is the property south of Hackamore along 116, the Foxberry Farm. It's a fence, it rolls with the land and the property, it's split rail, it's nice. I would rather see composite because it'll last longer. Just input to what would come back as final plat. The broken ones, yep, the cows or the horses are gonna get out. It bothers the daylights out of me, so. But again, I'd make it nice if we say yes. And again, the existing neighbors across the street, it is going to impact them. I understand that. There's many different ways that this property could impact those neighbors. If this goes through, I want them impacted the least. The noise stuff that we talked about, the visual looks, not taken, oh my gosh, some of the forested areas in their front yards are unbelievable on what they've done over the years to plant trees and stuff. And I know I've had comments or conversations with Jeff, you want to make this nice. We hear from everybody, we're a gem waiting to be discovered. Well, I want this to be a gem when it comes in front of industrial park developments and stuff like that. If it goes through, there's a lot of play on words here. A lot of people think we're gonna stay country for the rest of our lives here and stuff. Things are gonna change, folks. And I apologize if they don't change the way everybody likes them, but still, I'm trying to think of which way I'm going tonight. Thank you for letting me talk crazy on a fence.
Of course.
I have some questions for staff that came up in my conversations with some of the neighbors. And this probably came up at the meeting that I missed back in October, but did Parks and Trails recommend the relocation of the trail off Larkin to the gas line easement?
The trail on Larkin, there's not enough room to put an off-road trail on Larkin and have landscaping on Larkin. And Councilmember Nichols was there, but I think that was the discussion. It was certainly a struggle with staff, Three Rivers, and the Parks Commission, but ultimately that was the reason for the recommendation.
Okay, otherwise we would have probably just had parking lot right up to the edge of a trail, is my guess, to make it work. And then they noted the 2040 comp plan appears to still show the relocation of County Road 10 down to Larkin. That died, didn't it? By Hennepin County?
Correct. Yeah, that is,
County Road 50, I think you were talking about.
yeah, 10 still goes north on the comp plan, but
50 is,
but it
okay,
doesn't,
sorry.
50 doesn't go south anymore on the comp plan.
Okay. Soon list.
So they're gonna do, as part of the PUD, road improvements on the interchanges of Larkin and Bluebell and Larkin and 116. currently no changes on the stretch in between. So how do we deal with road resurfacing, future resurfacing, right? Because normally what we do if the road needs to be resurfaced, we assess the residents a certain amount.
Well, we have an assessment policy that would dictate how we do that. On Larkin, that stretch specifically, they just, I wouldn't say, about 3 years ago, we did an overlay. That was their quote-unquote free overlay as part of our assessment policy. So if we had to overlay that again, that would come back if we follow our assessment policy theoretically. There's a program for that, but that, you know, we'd have to evaluate that at the time. They did have, that road did have their free overlay.
Yeah, so I guess my question is going that with this additional traffic related to this light and industrial facility, it's gonna accelerate the deterioration of the road, right? Because of increased traffic. So we probably need to think about it as a council, and I don't know if we already have it in our policy, but how does it get assessed between residential and commercial in an application like this?
Yeah, I think we'd have to we'd have to have that exercise of, do we want to differentiate that? I can't remember if we do or not for an overlay, but I think we have that ability to evaluate that and change the policy at some point if it were the applicant council.
There are a couple different options that we have for different methods for determining assessments outlined in the policy, and we look at each of them when we go to look at an assessment, but generally we don't have it broken down currently in our current policy, and we just want to have a discussion with the city attorney to see how we could do that, because in a 429 process you have to be somewhat consistent in how you would evaluate it, so we certainly could talk to the city attorney about that.
On the 429, it's based on value added to the property, right?
Benefit to the property.
So our assessment policies right now, I believe, generally 90% the low end of the benefit range. So we would get opinions from an appraiser on that and then apply it based off of that. So if you recall Appaloosa Woods, you know, we did a pavement project, and even Corcoran Trail, we did 90% the low end for those projects, and there was a distinction on some properties, like whether they had existing driveway or existing pavement in front or not, and whether they were, you know, on a private drive in Appaloosa Woods case around. So that gets the differentiation between commercial and residential, I think, would get differentiated by the appraisal, and we'd apply the 90% of the low end of the benefit range. That's our, I believe, our existing policy, and that's always subject to review by council, but I think that's how it would get differentiated.
Okay.
Maybe it should be reviewed at a certain point when we're talking about projects of this scale.
I think we would have to, and then basically, as that's the only point of egress into that facility and the whole benefit, they would have a whole direct benefit in my mind. So they would pay a higher portion. Maybe Lieutenant Burns can talk about the city's ability to control speed limits. We've heard a lot of questions with regards to safety and pedestrians walking and kids playing in that area. If we don't look at a trail, what's the city's ability to regulate the speed from the current 45?
Sure, so if we ask MnDOT to do a speed study, we're stuck with whatever MnDOT says. So they could raise the speed limit, they can lower it. So that's kind of where we're at with that. We can also do our own speed study without MnDOT, but there's a lot of restrictions with that. You probably can't go from 45 down to 15, right? So you'd have to meet engineering, design standards, all those kinds of things if we looked at it ourselves. So would 45 to 30? Possibly, right? If it meets all the standards.
Thank you for that document, Lieutenant Burns. One question I had.
Sure.
After reading the state policy, it sounded like if there was a bike lane on the road, you gain additional capacity to control speed. If we're going to be adding or looking to add some kind of a pedestrian feature, maybe that would be an appropriate vehicle to ensure that we've got the most control that we can.
Sure.
At least for that section until we get to Blue Bell or Blue Bonnet.
Correct, yes. And those are the standards that they were looking at. Basically, it just needs to be defendable why you went to the speed that you went to. So,
And I think to add on to Lieutenant's comments there, from the engineering perspective, it's generally encouraged to broadly look at your entire city and develop a speed limit policy that applies to certain streets and certain standards versus kind of saying this street from this section is going to be this and this street's going to be, versus the arbitrary to be more of a broad plan. And then when you look at that, sometimes it gets trickier to implement those ones. So that's the support of what's the justification for making the change. So, it would probably be recommended by staff to go through a broad exercise to evaluate the whole city and our speed limits before we just, kind of arbitrarily just pick a section, but.
Those were some of the questions that came out of my discussion.
Can I ask a speed limit question?
Sure.
It looks like the section from Buckskin to Blue Bonnet is 370 yards, which is not a quarter mile. But from, I think, in that particular section, that there are 4 houses which would allow us to put the speed limit to 35 in that section. But if we go from, because it has to be a quarter mile and driveways that are 300 feet apart.
I think that was correct, yeah, 300.
So I think there is a section, and I'm trying to measure it here. I wanted to pause the speed limit question and then do the calculations. Because I think there is a section that you could decrease the speed limit to 35. So it could be 45 and then 35 for like 0.4 of a mile, and then back up to 45, which would help the situation, I think, a little bit as far as speed limits go.
I would propose we consider, this is going to be an area where we have a trail that'll be regional in scope. It's going to eventually, if you follow Larkin east, you'll run into the linear park. That's also sort of a major feature of the future downtown area. I'm wondering if it makes sense to try to have a bike lane that would connect from Blue Bonnet all the way east to Larkin. And then for that segment, because of the bike lane, you would have a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. When you get past that, then it can go up to whatever's appropriate for Larkin as it gets into the rest of the city. But the regional trail is kind of an asset in that area that we would want to protect with a lower speed limit anyway. And it shares the side benefit of providing assurance for the pedestrians in the area at the same time.
We are able to do it.
Well, and generally, I would say that speed limit would start at 116. It wouldn't just be that short stretch.
Right.
You wouldn't want to have 45 from Larkin up to the development and then 370 yards of 35 and then go back to 45, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because the statute says houses and not driveways.
Okay.
The houses are sufficiently close that within the distance that we could decrease the speed limit in that particular section.
Okay. I mean, I'd be on board with that if we can do it.
That wouldn't be part of the
No.
PUD.
No, that'd be a different
That'd be a
conversation for,
thing.
I'm just saying, I'm
Yeah.
throwing it out there.
To address public safety
Yeah.
questions.
But if we see a need for safety improvement, that might be something we want to put into the PUD requirement. That's kind of where the 4-foot extension of the road width would come into play. So there is an element we might want to talk about. If we're going to try to establish an improved safety feature in this area, there could be PUD impacts to trying to set that up.
Talking about the pedestrian access.
So the 4-foot shoulder or off-road trail.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess where's the council on that as, including it as a PUD benefit?
Can we, it'd be nice to see a map, just to get a visual idea.
Can we
of
just
what-
get an overhead of the site and maybe out to
Just pull up the
116?
location map.
Would we be able, if I may, Mr. Mayor, would we be able to put it on the shoulder? Because if I remember the topography of the properties from 116 out to here, on the north side, there's ditches in front of the storage facilities and stuff. To add a bike path would be difficult, but is a shoulder enough for a bike lane? And then having right turn lanes and all of those things in, I mean, are we even able to do what we're thinking of doing?
So you could probably just add a condition that says, if this is the way you're going, the applicant is responsible for providing a pedestrian route between Buckskin and Blue Bonnet on the south side of the road.
Okay.
Must be approved by the city engineer and provided as part of the final PUD plans. Because I don't know that we can know for sure till we have a little more data about the best way to do that. As Kevin said, maybe it is a wider shoulder and a painted trail, which we have, but maybe it is separated. So-
Yeah, I don't know if there's enough room there with some of the education you've given me, Kevin. It's gonna be hard to have a separate
Yeah,
trail.
I think one clarification, are we looking just between Blue Bonnet and Buckskin? Or I also heard a suggestion about going all the way to 116. And north side versus south side would be an important distinction. You have to start looking at what's platted and what's
Right.
not. So the further you go, the more unplatted properties you're gonna hit and may require easements to construct that.
Yeah.
And there's just more challenges the broader you go, so, that's something to think about. But we would probably need to clarify, you're looking at north side, south side, and the distance you're looking for.
Well, you were talking about.
When I drove today, I looked at Blue Bonnet to Buxton, and I believe we have a couple options there that we can do on the south side of the road. I would think provides the most, from my opinion, that provides the most benefit to the residents on the south, because if the trail's on the north, they'd have to cross the road and then cross the road back. And then maybe one way to think about it is, this is a collector road. Maybe think about Ravinia, Gleason Parkway is more of a collector road. And then this is basically having a trail getting you to Paddock Lane or getting you to Annabelle, where it's off kind of the through street and not designed. So I would think if a goal's adding pedestrian safety, I think if you connected at a minimum Blue Bonnet to Buckskin, to me, it would improve that, it would address that. It's ultimately up to you, but I think that we could do something on the south side, and I think it would address that from my perspective.
There's, if I may, Mr.
Yeah.
Mayor, there's absolutely nothing we can do as a city to get lights at the intersection of Larkin and 116.
Good question. So when they evaluated this project, we evaluated what's in front of us. As per the EAW, the traffic study, that traffic study justifies turn lanes at the entrance and improvements to 116. It doesn't trigger the signal at this time. We anticipate at that intersection, due to spacing on 116 and due to what's in our comp plan around it, that at some point there will be a signal at 116 in Larkin. So at some point, the development in the community, when it happens, will trigger that. This in itself doesn't trigger that according to the feasibility study.
Yeah, no, I understand that. When you go Larkin to 116, Larkin jogs across. When you cross 116, it jogs
Yep.
to the north and stuff. I'm trying to remember, was anything changing there with the addition of the power station there?
The power station had an improvement to beef up the road,
Is that-
access. This project would require basically that road would realign
Okay.
a safer connection. So if you look at that layout in there, that would get addressed and corrected with this project. That's a condition, so it would carry through to the east side of 116.
The sight line to the north of 116 in Larkin, the fence line, the chain link, the convoluted trees that are there and those kind of things, that's another business and stuff. Is there anything that can be done to clean that sight line up? Is that in the easement along?
That would all be
116.
evaluated in that improvement, right? So if there's something where it's out of context and they're encroaching into the county right away, again, the county has that authority, so it would come up in that project when we survey it.
Okay.
And it could be addressed, so we'd probably rely on the county for that, because it's their right away. So it would have to be identifiable that there was an issue. I don't know if there one exists today.
Okay, I see that there is, but
But we
that's
would
my
look at all that, the
opinion.
county would approve
That
it.
whole corner would
Yeah.
be reevaluated
Yeah, we'd have to we'd have to
and
address.
part of this development, so to speak. Part of this
Those
approval.
improvements would be required as part of this development. That
Okay.
gets flushed out in the ultimate design. We'd have our engineering team look at it. Hennepin County would sign off on it. If there are site distance issues, that would have to be addressed and would come up through those designs.
When you talk to the neighbors and anybody else that travels 116, it's atrocious, and I can disagree, but I'm traveling through there about 4:30 in the morning and there's no traffic, but I don't hit it at 8 o'clock AM, so.
That can be rough.
I just a concern on that intersection, like we've all had in the past, along many intersections along 116, so.
In terms of the distance to cover, I think Bluebonnet to Buckskin would be a good start. Ultimately, I'd want to see it carry all the way through to 116 to connect to the linear park,
And that would maybe be more of a city project at a future
potentially.
date.
I'm open to it if it helps us enhance the public safety on the street, as long as it doesn't impose upon the neighbors.
Oh,
Right.
And that's a question I had too. If
And
it's going to
new
connect to
trees.
Larkin
Yeah, all
and
that.
landscaping.
and 116, the linear park that's going to be along 116, does it extend south of Larkin, or does it only go north? So then I would suggest that we consider more carefully whether it's going to go on the south or the north side. Because if we're going to end up with a stoplight at that intersection in the future, it would be nice if the pedestrian access, whether it's bike lane or something else, is on the same side as the future park will be. So you're not crossing twice when you get to 116.
Yeah, but the north side doesn't benefit these people.
It gives them a place to walk.
Yeah, they still
They
have
gotta
to
get
cross
to it.
You
Larkin
gotta
Road
cross
to get to
Larkin,
it.
the neighborhood does.
But if you think 50 years into the future, when that regional trail is in place anyway, when the regional trail is in place, that's probably where most people will walk recreationally anyway. So they'll end up on the north side
I
regardless.
think maybe that's something that could be looked at in a future year when another site comes in that does get it to the point where it's triggering more work at that intersection and the light going in,
Mhm.
and presumably some further improvements to the road, maybe that's when we could do something on that side. And it would make more sense to do something on that
Okay.
side. Just not thinking out loud.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What definition are we using for light industrial?
What definition are we using? How do you mean?
Well, I looked on city code for the definition sections of light industrial. I didn't see any.
Oh,
There's
So-
only I-1 in our code, I believe.
Yeah.
There's only,
It's just the one
the title is light industrial.
Yeah, but how do we define, we're assuming, I think, that I think some of the assumption of that if we don't do a PUD, that they'll just straight zone it and bypass anything we're trying to do to alleviate the impact to the neighbors, like, that's all, they'll just do whatever they want. And so I see a flaw in that is when I look up the definition of light industrial, it says, light industrial means buildings used solely to house industrial use that are not more than 1 story in height and not exceeding 10,000 square feet in gross floor area, or not more than 2 stories in height and not exceeding 6,000 feet in gross floor area. So, like the premise of this even being
Is that our?
it's not our city code. It's the first definition when I looked up light industrial
Okay,
that I saw was this one.
gotcha.
I haven't read all of them, but like, in America, we don't, like, when we think of industrial and we look at it from the 50s standpoint, we just see smokestacks everywhere and like, just all kinds of stuff going on and,
Right. I
like-
think we've tried to narrow it down a bit by just what the allowed uses are in our I-1 district,
Correct.
but I don't know all the history of how we got to those specific uses, I guess.
I don't either, but I don't think of that when I think of light industrial.
Okay.
And so I question the premise that automatically they'll just do whatever they want if we don't do a PUD.
Gotcha.
And if we had a clear definition of light industrial, it would help for me to alleviate that concern.
So in code, light industrial has a bunch of permitted uses. One of them is office warehouse, which is what has been talked about a lot for this development.
Yeah,
And there isn't an area limit
of what?
of the building.
Building size.
There's just setback requirements and height requirements, and there's a maximum impervious surface coverage target.
Yeah, so what's the permitted use of?
Office/warehouse is what it says in code. You could also have a recycling facility
Yeah,
or a lumberyard, a printer, civic buildings, auto detailing shops,
yeah.
office, medical, and professional, printing and publishing, warehousing, distribution, and indoor storage.
So there's no established there's no established size restriction.
Right, not in our code.
Does that automatically mean, like, if they don't specifically say, so you are permitted to put in a recycling center? Could you make this whole place like a junkyard where people bring all their old cars and that would be an approved use because we don't specifically say, well, there is an approved use, but we don't have the ability to say, well, we don't really mean a recycling center that's 75 acres of junkyard. Like, you could make the argument that that is a permitted use, therefore we have no choice but to let somebody have that be a 75-acre junkyard. So, I don't know the answer to the question, but just because it says that you can use it as a warehouse, does that mean that you can build 4-story warehouses that are open 24 hours a day and that impact the neighbors profoundly? Like, I think that and I don't know, the attorney's not here, but I think we could have the discretion of, fine, it's allowable, but we can further define size and other metrics that aren't in the code.
Yeah, there's a limit on height, so you can
Yeah.
control the 4-story aspect, for sure.
Height limit's 45.
There's some minimum lot areas and widths and depths, as well as the structure setbacks, so.
But maybe that's something we should talk about, if we're likely to encounter more strict zoning approvals or
Straight zoning.
requests in the future, are we satisfied with the requirements in the code
Yeah,
that we have
and,
today?
and are we bound by them under the strictest application of the code. Like in theory, if we're bound by the strictest application, this could be a 75-yard junkyard and we couldn't do anything about it. But I don't think that's true.
Well, just for the record, junkyards are not a permitted use. They're specifically defined in the code, and they are not permitted.
Yeah, but
I
you're,
just don't want the audience to think that is a
It's
permitted.
an
No,
it's an
I think that-
indoor recycling facility.
I think if you made it like junkyards aren't really allowed anywhere anymore, but a recycling facility that processes vehicles and extracts metals and parts from them would be allowed. It's all in the eye of the beholder. A auto recycling facility, that's what we'd call a junkyard today. We'd use that parlance of it. So I could make the argument that I want to put a automobile recycling center on that 75 acres. And somebody could say, well, it's a permitted use. Recycling is a permitted use. But I would think that we would be able to say, we don't, it's not what we had intended. And I don't know if we have that flexibility as a council to say, yeah, it's a permitted use, but that's really not what we had intended, and would that hold up in court?
Well, we asked council that today. right?
Yeah, I spoke with the city attorney today just to confirm that as long as there is no variances or it's not, if it meets the requirements within the code, if it's a plat, we would have to approve it. If it meets the code as written.
Or if it's a site plan.
Or
that
if it's
meets
a
the
site
code.
plan
Right.
that meets the code. Now, however, with the PUD, there's the flexibility to not approve it and have that negotiation.
Yeah, and with the PUD, you could limit uses. Again, our code does not allow junkyards. But if you wanted to make.
But it would
that a
have,
condition,
you have to
say no
stop saying that,
junkyards.
because it technically would if you titled it a automobile recycling place.
But that's not how we define junkyards in our code. We define junkyards in our code, but the point is you can limit uses with a PUD, but you can't under straight zoning. If it's a listed use in the straight zoning and they came in under straight zoning, you'd have to allow them. Could you have an argument about what a recycling facility was? You could call the attorney and we could talk about that then, if that was the proposal. I'm just saying, for this PUD, one of the benefits of the PUD is you can prohibit certain uses that would otherwise be permitted in the I-1 district. So you could say no recycling centers.
And there are a few in the draft resolution, I believe,
Right.
that are excluded.
Right.
What are we, what's the applicant locked into once the preliminary is approved and the final is approved? And let's say they build buildings A and B, right? They sell A and B and those are built 10 years down the road. Buildings C and D have a different purchaser that wants something different.
I think we wouldn't be
Are
under
they
any.
limited to what was approved, if approved tonight?
Well, they are, but they do always have the option to come back and ask for a PUD amendment, and the council could approve or deny that. So once it's approved tonight, if it were approved tonight, you'd have conditions, and then they'd get the final PUD approved for the individual lots. So with the final PUD, what would likely happen based on their proposal, if the preliminary PUD was approved, they would probably come back for the final PUD, final plat for lots A and B, and leave the remainder as outlots for future development, and then come back with the final PUD for those. And if it did not match the approved PUD, they would need a PUD amendment. And then again, PUD, council, whoever's in place at the time, has the discretion to say yea or nay.
And that would be regardless if it's the same owners or
Right.
sold differently.
Yay or nay, and nay would revert back to what was previously approved.
Correct.
Right.
Or any, well, if it's previously approved, do they have to stick to what was approved if it falls within straight variance, once it's approved in a,
Yeah, so the PUD where it's different than a straight plat, like a plat that just created 5 lots, you don't know what's going to come in. But with the PUD, these buildings, these trees are approved, and any variation from that requires a PUD amendment.
Even if
Okay.
we're to go back to straight zoning, yeah, because they had the preliminary approved as a PUD.
Once I'm gonna speak in hypothetical. If we approve tonight, and we, let's say, for example, put on all these caveats and approved it, do they still have the option to not accept what we approve and then come back with straight zoning?
Yes. I think, just to rephrase, I should just, if you approved it with conditions that they found onerous, could they just let this lie dormant and come back with a preliminary plat and a site plan under the straight I-1 zoning? Yes.
Okay. I kind of wanted that point to be made, so when we think of options, you have to think of that as well.
There's definitely a risk-reward trade-off to consider.
Okay. So I guess how do we feel on potentially the proposed language that Kendra kind of threw out quickly? I don't know if that was intended to be a word-for-word suggestion or just a hypothetical. But about the adding the benefit of forgetting exactly how you worded it.
Pedestrian corridor, or?
Essentially, and of course, I lost which page I wrote it on, but requiring that they essentially work with staff to figure out the trail option between Blue Bonnet and
Buckskin?
Buckskin, yeah. Kendra, did you have any
I was just-
corrections or?
Yeah. I think we would, include a condition that says, direct the applicant to work with engineering to plan for a trail on the blank side of Larkin between blank and blank, and bring the revised plan back with the PUD final plan. Because again, you guys need to decide north or south and where that distance is. But you could add that, if you chose to add that as a condition to the PUD resolution. And
Which would be resolution
120.
120, yep.
And you might make it, for example, number 14 is the plans must be revised to show a 60-foot half right-of-way for County Road 50, and the stuff before that's the trail. So a new 14, maybe you'd add it.
Okay. I'd make a motion to amend Resolution 2022-120 to add that language as suggested by Kendra for a trail or some sort of pedestrian access corridor on the south side of Larkin between Buckskin and Blue Bonnet.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I have no problem with it as long as it doesn't impede into these neighbors' properties.
Right. Yep.
Or take out trees.
Right.
I'd rather see it shift to the north than take out existing trees.
Well,
Should we leave that open
The-
until it
the
gets
direction
defined?
to the north,
Whether
south?
it's north or south,
Yeah.
to avoid having to amend it later?
Just
What are we amending?
We're adding, potentially adding a condition into the PUD resolution
Okay.
about the trail or path or whatever it could be.
Okay.
And we're not committing to north or south.
Yeah, so I'll withdraw my motion, if you withdraw the second, and I'll make it again with leaving north-south open for staff to determine.
I will second again.
Okay, any further discussion again?
So we're only changing the language in the PUD without actually voting on the
We're not
PUD.
voting, right, we're not voting on the PUD, we're just
Just to be
voting on, yep, we're just voting on adding a condition into the PUD, and then we'll later vote on.
Yeah.
Okay.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries, 5-0. Okay, should we just knock off some of the other ones? The fencing item that we've discussed. I think both look nice. I see both of your guys' points on the fencing issue. I think maybe there's a little bit more visual, they can kind of just break it up a bit more, which is what we've asked them to do with the building, with the staggered fencing and having landscaping in front in parts and behind in parts. But also, I get what you're saying about it, just a straight line fence looks good too. I don't think there's a bad option. I don't know if we have a preference that we want to nail down in the resolution. And also, in terms of the fencing, are we preferring the option 4, is it, that's shown in the renderings?
Is that the,
Well, it's the
Horizontal.
4 horizontal, yeah.
with the brown composite?
So, Mr. Mayor, 23C
Yep.
has the white 4-rail fence shown on the plans. You may want to modify that. And if I could, I just want to come back to Councilmember Nichols' comment, and related to fencing, that's why, is the plans do show a screening or privacy fence, but I did not include a condition that you may want to add as a new 23F that says fence details for the solid screening privacy fences on the west must be provided for review and approval by the city council with the PUD final plat application, as long as we're talking about fencing.
I will move to add that.
I'll second it. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Okay.
Can I ask, is that fence on the street side of the berm? How does it set up? If I'm standing on the street, what am I looking at? Am I looking at fence, berm, landscaping, parking lot?
Yeah, go back to that one.
Both, depending where you're standing. So that, I think that's probably the best one. So, in the middle there, there's a little bit of a berm, and the fence is on the Larkin side there, and the landscaping's behind it. If you go on the right side of that, there's landscaping, then a fence, and then landscaping behind it. So you could certainly provide direction on both the straight line or staggered, and whether landscaping should be on both sides. But it kind of alternates as the fence moves. The landscaping kind of stays with the fence, and that moves along with the fence.
Okay.
So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
Site plan, maybe you can kind of see that.
Somebody made a comment earlier about landscaping is limited in height under transmission line. Is that where all this falls?
I'm sorry.
Somebody made a comment earlier that landscaping is limited in height under the transmission line.
Correct. The
Is that
tran-
here?
Yes.
So is that we're talking the whole length of this then?
Right. There's a transmission line that is,
I know it runs parallel to Larkin.
it's on the north side, and
But all landscaping would be directly underneath that?
right. It extends into this site, I think, 40 feet, I want to say. It's the power line easement's an 85-foot wide easement that straddles that section line. So it does extend into this about 45 feet into the property.
So does that impact the areas where there would be retaining walls?
The retaining walls are primarily on the west. The retaining wall that's on the south is really just that southwest corner of building B there.
Yeah.
So there really aren't any along the front, but yes, it does run over that section. So really, the parking lot is that curb along Larkin is in that power line easement. We don't really have a good civil site plan sheet that shows the easement and the parking lot, but that's pretty close.
Okay, so if we did do a retaining wall type berm on the other end, how does that impact anything with the,
Would probably just mean shorter landscaping, like. I
well,
think
none of
it's
this
all the same.
landscaping is tall in that area, right? The only thing that's
Yeah,
tall
not
is the
particularly.
trees and the islands within the,
So the power line easement kind of goes to the back of the first row of parking. So your question is, if that landscaping in that 20 feet along Larkin, if that wasn't the small berm, but the
Taller.
triangle, as Kevin described it,
The wedge, maybe.
the wedge. No, I mean, I think there's sort of a 6-foot height limit from the electric company, and you're not going to get more than 6 feet in that retaining wall thing. I don't really know. It's not even I guess it's a retaining wall. I guess that's what it would be, retaining that
If you're
property.
retaining that berm, but
so you're 6 feet in height on top from the top of the vegetation. No matter what we do.
The applicant has had the conversation directly with GRE. We have a condition that says GRE needs to approve it. They've approved this plan, so they would just need to go back to them and make sure they would approve the V, or the triangle, or whatever.
Okay, if we went down that route and the power company doesn't approve, then what do we end up with?
This.
We'd have to revert back to the,
Yeah.
So, you could have, I think you could ask them to explore that and bring that back with the PUD final plan. I don't know that we're gonna like that very well, but, that could be the direction, and the condition could be, if it's not approved by Great River Energy, then this is how we want the fence to be. Because I'd be getting rid of the fence, so you'd say, in lieu of the fence, we gotta come up with a better name than the V.
Wedge.
But build the wedge, and if it's not approved by GRE, come back with, the landscape plan with this fence.
yeah, I mean, that's why I was asking, where does the fence sit? If the fence sits on this side of the berm, then whether you go higher with the berm wouldn't impact the fence.
The ability to maintain that berm.
Yeah, the berm
would go
is, I
away.
mean, I think berm is a bit of an overstatement for this. I mean, at its highest point, it's 3 feet, so for most of it, it's, 2 feet tall. So when you looked at that image of those fences, there's some places that are fairly flat
Yeah,
in that berm.
I think that's where some of the comments, what I heard from people is they were thinking this is a berm as a berm meant to screen, and it really isn't.
No, so I think the image that when you just passed, I mean, that is the view from, I think it's a pretty reflective view from Larkin. So it's really screening cars. Nothing's going to screen that 30-foot, I think it's 30 feet now, 30-foot tall building.
Right. So the shrubbery along there, is that gonna screen lights of cars all year round?
It needs
They're
to.
they're conifer? Okay.
Yeah, so they've got, I think Mugo pine is generally what most of it is. An evergreen shrub.
But yeah.
How tall does that grow?
I'm not a landscape
I
architect.
think like 4 to 6 feet.
I was just going to guess that.
Okay. So at its height, it would probably do more than any type of triangle,
Wedge.
wedge.
I get what you're saying. I don't know that we're gonna add a ton of benefit with the wedge, but we can explore it, but I wouldn't.
I'd like to explore it to get an idea if it does. I mean, I'm trying to squeeze as much out of this lemon as I can.
You'd probably, the best case I could see is you would double the height of the berm that it is today, because you're taking the ramp up and the ramp down and using it all to build height. So if your max height is 3 feet, your max height probably won't exceed 6 feet. And then you won't have the fence and the landscaping on top anymore. So your net pickup, if you're gonna build your fence on top of a 2-foot berm versus a 6-foot berm, you'll end up being shorter, I think, with the
Well, that's
wedge.
kind of, I was wondering about the fence. Does the fence go on the berm, or does it go between the berm and the road, right?
Well, I think it
'Cause-
definitely wouldn't go on it if it's built as the wedge.
Yeah, but even if it's not built as a wedge,
It
the
is
fence
on the
doesn't do
berm.
anything but add aesthetics. It doesn't do anything to screen anything.
Right.
I guess in my mind, I was thinking the fence sat off that area in front of it, but I'm probably totally wrong.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. The fence is on the berm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just want to be, everyone to understand, that's the berm. It's, it's not a big,
Okay.
like the golf course down in Medina has a berm. This is not that kind of berm.
Yeah, so this is, it's probably sitting at the beginning of the upslope.
In some places it is, but like the one in the middle is on the top of the slope, the one where the
Where
greenery
it's
is
staggered.
behind it.
Yeah.
And then, as you slide back, some of it might be a little bit on the back slope of the berm.
All right, I mean, if staff feels that it won't maximize any screening benefit.
Then I think the next thing would be just that, paragraph 23. Do we want to change anything as drafted?
I think
terms of
we
the-
talked about the white four-rail fence becoming the composite brown four-rail fence.
Did we?
Dean and I talked about it. I don't know if anybody else.
Okay. Care to share your thoughts on that, either of you?
So I like the white also. My only concern with the white is I've seen white fences that get hit by sprinklers turn brown. So I think there might be more maintenance issues with that. The brown would be more enduring if it's a composite material than a white might be.
Gotcha.
In the country, we don't sprinkle around our fences.
But
Just saying.
Are you saying our city water will be brown?
I don't know. Medina city water is brown.
Well, this would be Maple Grove water still.
Oh, okay.
So it's definitely brown.
I'd prefer the darker and least amount of maintenance, longest lasting composite you can find is,
Okay. So do you want to make a motion to
add
that
that
effect? Yeah.
recommendation.
It's 23.
I'll
paragraph
move
23C.
to amend 23C to change white four-rail fence to natural colored composite four-rail fence.
Okay.
I would second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Discussion.
Oh, sorry. Well,
I don't think any of us are qualified to say which fences are the most appealing, and that's why I'll vote no.
okay.
Understood.
Now we'll do the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
4-1. Okay, so that does carry. So we have the two changes. We discussed the berm issue. Those are the big topics I had. Does anyone else have any major things that we should look at in terms of changing resolutions?
At one point, and I'm sorry we've spent so much time,
Rather get it right.
do the applicants need parking in the front of the building facing both ways? Is it an absolute? Okay,
I would just say our code requires that,
Gotcha.
thank you. That,
parking.
that would solve some of the problems with headlights shooting at the neighbors across the street if this doesn't do what we need to, but per what Kendra is promising, committing to, that this fence, berm, everything will stop any headlight shining in across the neighbors. Am I putting too much on the table, Kendra?
The code does require that, and so we'll work to make sure, we want to have an interesting landscape there, but
Yeah.
we'll work to make sure we get it right.
And I know the applicants do, and I know the folks across the street have worked hard putting together what they've got right now,
That is
but,
our goal.
One other element we didn't talk about, but that was requested that we consider in a resident email was the connection to the industrial park street instead. And so I did ask Kendra and Kevin to look into that suggestion as if that could be a requirement. And I guess the city attorney has weighed in and given some feedback, Would you mind sharing what you had for me?
Sure. So we spoke with the city attorney a little bit about requiring something that is not currently connected, and generally, we could make that a condition if public safety and engineering felt like we needed to. However, likely, if you were to do something like that, if they can't require the land, then you could be looking at having an eminent domain process, and that's something that I've heard from council that in the past that is not something we'd like to do. So generally, when we've seen that required, you generally have to allow some flexibility to help get that land if that's a requirement that we want. Does that sum up? Kevin also spoke with this at
Could
city
that
attorney.
not also change potentially the requirements of the improvements needed to make out, that are needed elsewhere? If there was.
It would change a lot of things. I think we'd still look for a secondary access to Larkin, regardless. You know, it would probably eliminate the access to 50, that emergency one, and then that would, we need 2 points of access from public safety. So if that was mandated as one of them, we'd still keep Larkin and probably remove the one to 50. So that's something to factor. The other kind of long-term traffic play that we'd reevaluate the site, but if you're funneling if the goal was to funnel the trucks through 75th, there would be improvements made to 75th and 116, likely required, similar to what they were on Larkin 116. The big difference is that would never be a signaled intersection. So long-term, due to the county spacing, that's too close to 10.
Yeah.
So that would never be a signal intersection. So long-term, you want to send your trucks through a signal intersection.
Right.
So it would create long-term traffic issues in that area.
Gotcha.
Another point, and some of the things I know might be a little freaky, but to put a bridge across that creek bed, the expenditures there could, in my mind and some of the questions that I've asked people, could exceed over $3 million to be able to handle trucks, the traffic that would be going in from 75th and stuff. And I don't think we as a city have that much money, and I don't think the developer of this property would want to spend that kind of money to make that improvement, so.
Yeah, you need probably 60 feet of right of way. It dips down, so there's some grading, likely would be some retaining walls. Whether it's a box culvert or a bridge, it's a DNR jurisdiction. You know, I think anything can be built, so I want to be clear, anything can be built. But I think the distinction is just that you have two other points where it's touching a county road or a collector road, so it would be a deviation from policy to kind of target, you know, putting it on 75th. That would be just the policy deviation, and then long-term implication of sending trucks to that intersection would be would not be, a recommendation from a transportation perspective. So those would be the two primary kind of traffic analysis components that I would use to answer that question.
Okay. Alan's got a thought?
Okay, this is kind of a side topic, but it comes up because people ask the question. They assume, I think, in many cases that if we vote no, we kill this project, right? It's a yes, no, kill thing. But reality, there's no kill because the ordinance allows for the thing they're asking for if there was no variance or PD request.
Correct.
And you have an application that's active, you can't change ordinance with an active application that limits what the application already applied for when the ordinance was up.
That's correct.
So I think people need to understand that distinction from the general public.
Good thing to point out, for sure.
I don't know if I'd agree with that statement,
Okay.
but we can talk about that when it comes to discussing the
Okay.
actual vote.
Sounds good. If there's no other potential amendments? Does someone want to make?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I just want to, you did table it and ask them to relook at the architecture, so I just wanted to make sure nobody had comments on that.
Any thoughts on that? I thought the
I thought it was
improvements were nice.
improved.
Yeah.
I was expecting maybe something a little bit more. I don't know what necessarily, but I did think it got better, the story windows and the extra lining. It looks a little vanilla, but I think it is an improvement.
I wish that the setbacks wouldn't have been made higher on the architectural versus this here, where they're just set back and the roof line's the same height, versus they set it back and then they increase the height.
Oh, you don't like that? So, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yes.
Okay.
We could adjust that with, does that not count against building height, or?
It's still under the building height. Generally, that's one of the tools we use to break up a mass of a building is an articulation in the roof line or a change in the roof line, just like the roof or in the
Is that the
front
parapet
elevation.
or whatever they call it?
Yes, it is a parapet. Yeah, in this case, it is.
Way to go.
So it's really just something they tried to, it doesn't show on this image oddly, but it was something as an attempt to break up the mass of the building. The architects here, I think they've been very willing to, that one you can see it better, do whatever the council would like relative to that, but I just wanted to get some feedback because we did spend a bit of time talking about it last time.
I mean, height is one of the major concerns of the people in the area, and to increase it anywhere, I think goes against it, in my mind. Even if it is an accent.
So you just want it, you still want it set back, but you'd want it just flat with the rest of the roof?
Yeah, I think so.
I'd be fine with that. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
I would agree.
With what Alan was saying? Okay, to make that change,
Same resolution. Yeah, this is the same resolution in item 20. You could add that as a, D you'd want to change and say, and the roof line shall remain flat on all buildings.
okay, I'll make a motion to amend 2022-120 20D to state what Kendra just stated, that flat roof line on the setback areas.
Second.
Any discussion? All
But
those?
it- I can't make it look good in my head. Would it look good lowering that section instead of raising it, or does that screw with the, instead of just one straight line, it's not an entrance, I'll rescind, never mind. We beat this up good, so,
Okay.
never mind.
Then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? John?
I guess. Aye.
Okay.
One last question on 23 in Resolution 120. 23B says, "The plans show 31 trees will be planted at 16 feet high." I think I remember the trees in the parking lot islands were not 16 feet, but they were more than the 6 foot. I'm remembering like 10 to 12. But I don't see those reflected anywhere. Do we need to add that from the discussion from the last time? Or maybe the applicant can speak to, were those going to be 16 feet, and is that included in that total? Okay, so those will be 16 when they're planted. Kendra, would you confirm that?
Yeah, I'm going to the landscape plan to confirm. That's my memory, and the landscape plan is adopted as part of this.
Okay.
You're on the spot.
Yeah, sorry. This is how the sausage is made.
I think it's harder to do every year as you see. Okay. One PS2.
Generally, it's a 10-foot spruce,
Is it one
So then it's not
PS2,
the
is it
16.
10-foot too?
not 16. Ryder's got calculation of 10-foot spruce.
Okay.
And those
Okay.
ones are balanced.
So
Just
I
to-
guess,
Just
Yes,
to record what
there's
we've
8.
committed to do then, we would probably want to add, now it would be G, 7 10-foot spruces to be planted in parking lot islands.
Yeah, the plan sheet says there's 8 of them. So I'm not sure if there's a disconnect between the number you're seeing on the plan sheet,
but I guess the question is, do we need anything in the resolution to lock in that?
you do not need to add that because you're
Okay.
approving this landscape
Yeah.
plan. But certainly if you want to just memorialize it, you can, but you are approving this landscape plan in condition number 1.
And you do see that in the landscape plan?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm fine.
Good deal. Okay. If there's nothing else, does someone want to make a motion? Either, let me see here, a lot of numbers. Resolution 2022-119, denial or approval, as well as then we can get into the other ordinances and resolutions, kind of based on that first one.
You're asking for resolution.
Yeah, I think that'd be the first one we'd want to do.
I'll preamble with, I think it's always unfortunate when you have industrial and residential abutting one another without any kind of intervening separation or zone, whether that be some kind of higher density residential or a park or some kind of natural feature. And I don't agree with a lot of areas of the city where we have that. And I look forward with great ardor for the chance when we get to the next comp plan update to try to fix some of that. So I'm going to support this because I think it's better than what would happen if we reject it in terms of, because of the way the comp plan has constructed the zoning in this part of the city, it allows for out-of-scale buildings to be put in locations where they don't belong by right. And I don't want to see that happen. I'm not happy with the way that part of the city is designed. I am grateful that the developer has been as willing as they have been to add appropriate buffers where they can. It's not going to make it the way that residents want it to be. But I think it is better than the alternative and what we would see if we denied it. So
Okay.
that's where I'm at right now.
Okay. So, did you want to make a motion? Someone want to make a motion? I'll make the motion to approve resolution 2022-119 with findings of fact for rezoning, which is option B.
What is a 119 resolution to deny the request?
Well, it's numbered for
We
both.
have both options in there. so
I'm-
you can
I'm-
either do it
oh,
as
I'm-
approval or denial.
Yep, and my
Oh,
motion is
okay,
option
sorry,
B
sorry.
for approval. Do you have a second?
I will second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I would like to, if it's still a preamble before the vote, but after having it officially be voted upon. So I think there's a truth in zoning issue at play here. I think, like we've talked about many times, when people move into an area, they have the right to believe in the words of the zoning next to them. So if you live in a residential area and you have a residential zone coming in next to you, like shouldn't surprise you that houses are gonna be developed there. And where I lie is that there should be congruency between a permitted use